So, in my last video, I went over how I think some authors fail to do world building correctly. How I think that they don't use their power system in such a way that it feels like the world adapted to said power system. But then, of course, that got me thinking, what makes a good power system? What makes it satisfying to see powers in whatever context they exist in? Whether that be in a world building context or whether it be in the more, I would say, traditional context, like seeing two people punch each other with superpowers, right? And so when I think you talk about what makes a good or a bad power system, it generally comes down to two key things, right? Two things that really define whether you make or break a power system in a sense, right? And what those two are is firstly, there has to be some way to reflect the character's personality through the power that they use. There has to be some level of, I would say, personalization that comes about from the powers that they're using. And additionally, I think there has to be some level of skill expression that comes about from using your powers, right? So, what do I mean by this? Well, when I say that a character's personality kind of has to shine through with the powers that they use, I mean they have to, like, when you think of somebody that uses a fire power, you think of them being a hothead and explosive, right? Very, very short tempered, right? Because that reflects with what they've been designed to do. And I think that that kind of idea has to be, I would say, part of your character design from the very beginning, or part of your power design from the beginning, right? So as you can see in the thumbnail, obviously, I think that Dragon Ball does a very bad job of this, right? Because of the way that certain characters in Dragon Ball work, it's pretty much they're all punching and kicking in vaguely the same way, right? It doesn't really feel like there's a level of self-expression that comes about through Dragon Ball's power system. Does that mean that Dragon Ball is poorly written? No. Does that mean that the characters don't have different personalities? Obviously not. But it doesn't feel like it doesn't really feel like, Vegeta using a big bang attack is really that different from, Goku's Kamehameha. It doesn't really feel like any of these attacks feel different because of the people using them as much as it is just it's another laser attack, right? But I would say My Hero does this in a much better way, right? I think that its power system, though I don't think it's incredible, I think it does a very good job at, I would say, using its characters in such a way that their personalities are reflected in their powers, right? Take somebody like Todoroki, right? Initially, he's a very cold and, I would say, to himself kind of character, right? And that's reflected in the fact that he only uses ice. He isn't very easy to get along with. He's not very easy to talk to. He's not very easy to do any of these things with because he's so, I would say, by himself, right? But once he starts using his fire powers, he starts to warm up to the cast. You can see this kind of, I would say, level of symbolism, um, I mean, for lack of a better word, symbolism put into the ideas of their characters, right? Bakugo is very explosive, and so he has an explosive quirk, right? He's very up in your face, he's very confrontational, right? He's very loud, and that I think goes along with this explosive power, right? Like all of these things, I think you can see reflection, right? You can see that each character, what they find important is reflected in their powers, right? And I would say that um, Jujutsu Kaisen, which obviously I've put in a higher regard, does this, I would say, to the nth degree. It has a certain X factor. I'd say it executes on it much better, right? It does. It does. Like when you think of characters like Gojo, right? The idea that nobody can touch him is entirely the point of his character, right? The idea that he is so strong that nobody can relate to him and that struggle that he has with it is inherently intertwined with his character, right? And you can see that reflected in almost every character. All their powers that they have reflect in their character struggles and what they value and who they are, right? And I think that that's what takes it to that next level, right? But I would say that in that regard, there's a lot more equality between a lot of, I would say, power systems. I think a lot of people tend to get that one right. A lot of people understand that, I need to make my characters have their powers reflect their personality. I think that's a very simple thing that most people, it's the first step, right? But I think what people forget to do is the second part that I talked about, a level of skill expression, right? And I would say that this is the big problem with Dragon Ball, in my opinion. Right? This is not to say that Dragon Ball is poorly written, but it is to say that the power system in Dragon Ball is really bad in terms of expressing the skill of the people there. It doesn't feel like you can get any better. It feels like there is, despite the fact that the show's about breaking your limits and being better and training harder, if you're somebody like Krillin, you get sidelined by the time Super comes around because you're a human, right? If you're somebody like Piccolo, like it's there's certain characters that just don't get to compete because of the way the power system's written, right? Only Saiyans can be so strong. Only gods can be so strong. Only like so and so can be so strong. And so it feels like, especially when you're writing something about fighting people, and that's where a lot of your character development comes in, I'd say that you need to have an ability to keep characters relevant in around the end game, right? You need to make sure that the people in your story can realistically train hard enough to continue the fight far later into the story and still have like relevance in the story because they can still fight people, because that is where the character development comes in for these kind of series, right? What in manga or comic books or whatever, the characters don't talk things out as much as they do punch each other, and then after while they're punching each other, figure out their emotional problems. And so whenever a character can't fight people because of you've written a power system where they can no longer be included, it kind of fails to, I would say, allow development for certain characters that people want to see, right? And so why do I think that something like My Hero is much better at this? Well, for the characters that he feels like developing, I'm going to, you know, little the asterisks, I guess, to the point. For the characters he feels like developing, it does feel like you can do better. You can have a better move. If you train harder, you can stay relevant, and that's like basically everybody in Class 1A is relevant from the start of the series to the end of the series because they all train harder and do better. Even though it kind of feels like a stretch, even though it's a little like, are we sure that Tail Guy is really the deciding factor in the fight against All for One? Maybe not, right? But there's at least an idea that like, okay, all of these people at least have a place in the story by the time they get there, right? Because they train hard enough, and it's like, okay, sure, right? You can kind of like squint your eyes and be like, all right, he wants to keep him in because people like them, so therefore, will I can suspend my disbelief a little bit, right? But I think what makes Jujutsu Kaisen's power system so incredible and so what I would say so great in terms of what it does is things like the amount that the average sorcerer can do is, I would say, very very uncapped, right? Like, sure, if you don't have something like Dismantle and Cleave, you don't have something like Infinity, you're not going to be like top five in the verse, right? But even if you don't have those crazy kind of abilities, right? Through being good enough with jujutsu, you can still rise the ranks. You can still be a worthy sorcerer. You just aren't going to be special grade. You're just not going to be like that next level, right? Because everybody could theoretically do reverse curse technique. Everybody could theoretically land a black flash. Everybody could theoretically, X, Y, and Z. In terms of the actual jujutsu part of Jujutsu Kaisen and all of that kind of cursed energy technique part, it feels like everybody can, I would say, hold their own, right? Everybody can try to be relevant in the fight. And I think that that's what makes it such an intriguing power system, right? That people, regardless of kind of what they have as their power, right? Even if you have like anonymity power, where it's like this isn't gonna like destroy a city, right? It's just like you get a critical hit if you hit like whatever 3/7 of their body, right? it still makes sense that he can be relevant in terms of like a one-on-one fight with people, right? Because theoretically, like in a world where, spoiler alert, Nanami doesn't get popped, right? Like you can see that, okay, he could learn reverse curse technique, he could find a way to use his domain, he could do like he could do X, Y, and Z and theoretically keep getting stronger. It feels like, even though there are certain biological limits, right? Like the amount of cursed energy you have, but like for the average jujutsu sorcerer, it feels like you realistically could do more. It feels like with the training you could do more. And that's what I think makes it so incredible, right? It's the fact that, you know, that it feels like it's a perfect combination of having your genetic factors, like the, predisposed, you can only do so much, you can only have so much, you can only there's the certain biological limit, but it feels like you can, I would say, there at least feels like there's a way to fight against it in a certain way. It feels like, somebody could still be relevant in the fight against Sukuna or in the fight against Kenjaku or whatever, because of the way the power system's written. And I think that that's what makes the Shinjuku showdown, in after Gojo, right? I think that's what makes it so entertaining. It's because everybody, because of how much skill expression is within the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, right? Because of that, you can see, I would say, you can see how each one of the people becomes relevant to the fight against Sukuna, right? It makes a little bit more sense, if that makes it feels like they can all get their lick in on Sukuna because of how the power system was written to begin with, if that makes sense, right? And then obviously, there are, of course, other examples, throughout media, but I think that those two rules of, having having skill expression and having the personality of your fighter, be present within the power that they have. I would say that those two are like I would say that those two are like the big two, right? And I think you can, extrapolate that to see if a system is well written, right? Like something like Hunter x Hunter, I'd say, passes the like would because obviously Hunter x Hunter is seen as like the best to ever do it, yada yada. I would say that it passes. I would the eyeball check for those two, right? Like somebody like Karapika, even though it's like a 4-page long explanation for how the hell his powers work, right? It is very personalized to him, and the only reason he's able to, I would say, use his powers to the extent he is able to is because of how hard he has worked to achieve his goals, right? You can see that, like, okay, this, this power system is good because it can pass these two checks, right? And I would also like to end this off with saying that just because a you have a generic power system, just because you have a generic, like, you know, people use mana and they throw fireballs, right? Like that very like basic kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a poorly written story. It just means that I would say it's going to fail to have certain levels of depth and nuance that makes it fun to think about, right? Because I think the more effort you put into having every character feel like they have like kind of that main character energy, right? Having every character feel like they have, a personality and by proxy a power that is um, that is unique to them. I would say whenever you can do that, you have, in essence, kind of, um, you're on the right track to have a good story, right? Because again, something like Dragon Ball, I like Dragon Ball. I think Dragon Ball is good. I just think it's power system shit. I just think that the way that people fight each other is stupid, right? That it's like it sidelines so many characters, and I think that's annoying, right? But I don't think it's poorly written, right? Because it doesn't rely on, having the narrator explain how people are fighting each other as much as it just does, like, they punch and kick and shoot lasers at each other, and like the audience can get it. But I don't know, I prefer more complexity to less. And obviously, I'm an aspiring writer, but not a writer yet. So I this is obviously just my opinions. Regardless, I would like to thank you all for watching. Sorry for not uploading for like forever. Gonna be honest, just kind of lazy, just kind of didn't feel like it, and also just didn't have any ideas. So I'm just trying to make sure that these certain videos are put out in such a way that I don't know feels like I'm not just kind of putting out a video every day just for the sake of it. So that's my cope for why why I don't upload more. Regardless, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you all for 350 subscribers. It does mean a lot to me. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you probably with before the end of the month. Bye.